From the studios of Blackwater Media in the city of Atlanta, it's time for the Dr. William Lester Show. I'm, of course, your host, and I would like to welcome you to this exciting and fascinating foray into all things cool vintage. I wanted to share with you the one aspect of the cool vintage lifestyle that is very near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure to many other people out there in the listening audience as well. And I hope that you will be able to identify with what I'm going to talk about. But before I get into the meat of the subject matter, I just wanted to do a little Blackwater Media housekeeping, if you will. As you know, we produce a number of shows here for your enjoyment. The Shadowland radio show. We do the Historian's Almanac. We do the Nightfall radio show. Of course, this program featuring all things cool vintage. And we have a newer program that's called Pen and Ink, which has been a tremendous success. It is a program that explores expressions in poetry. And so for those of you who enjoy a nice poetry reading, please avail yourselves of that program. Of course, all of the shows can be heard on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, as well as Google Plus and Pinterest, and also the Blackwater Media Facebook page. So be sure to like, subscribe, and share. All right. Now, as I am sharing these details with you, I am, of course, enjoying my pipe, which is tonight filled with Blender's Gold Cavendish. It is a wonderful value-priced pipe tobacco. Again, we've said on earlier shows that Blender's Gold is a maker, a label, a private house label sold exclusively through Walgreens. And they make wonderful pipe tobaccos in a variety of aromas and variations. And they also make premium hand-rolled Dominican cigars. And I know that there are people, I know they exist because I've spoken with them, I've heard them on podcasts, and I've heard them on bulletin boards and forums, but there are many people who enjoy a wonderful pipe or a cigar, but they sometimes fall victim to this kind of elitist concept of, the idea of, enjoying a pipe tobacco or enjoying a cigar that is sold through a drugstore chain they perceive as something being beneath them. And I can assure you that nothing is further from the truth. I've had cigars, I've enjoyed pipe tobacco from across the price point spectrum. And I can assure you that the Blender's Gold label is a quality label. I mean, they are quality products. The cigars are long filler, hand-rolled Dominican cigars. The pipe tobacco is really well presented, very well appointed. Smokes very well, smokes very evenly. And ultimately, you're getting all of that at very moderate, reasonable price points. I think the tin of the Blender's Gold pipe tobacco is priced at $8.99. I think that's the price. So very reasonably priced. And so if you are inclined to enjoy a pipe, I would challenge you to go out and investigate Blender's Gold. With that, I have paired that with a little Lord Calvert whiskey. And I, as I am so known to do, have prepared a little highball concoction, and we've talked about this many times. You can use Scotch, whiskey, bourbon, or what have you. And tonight I have mixed that with a little 7-Up. Many times on the program I have used ginger ale with my highball, but I mixed it up a little bit, and so tonight it's 7-Up. Certainly a viable, acceptable alternative to ginger ale. on ice. And it's a wonderful drink that absolutely complements whatever you are utilizing for your smoking pleasure, whether it be a great hand-rolled cigar or a fabulous pipe bowl full of great pipe tobacco. Okay, so the way I want to get into this with you is in the following way. I'm just going to go back in my mind to childhood, and I remember going to the store with my mother. You go to the supermarket, you go to the drugstore, or what have you, and they would always have these wonderful paperback books on these little metal rotating stands, and you just kind of spin them around and look at the covers of these little novels. And I remember they were like $1. They're 75 cents, $1. And they were these wonderful science fiction novels, these fantastic fantasy novels with these amazing covers, this tremendous cover art. And I was struck by it. I had no idea what the stories, may have been about. I don't even remember being necessarily interested in saying, oh, I've got to read that book. But I was struck by the imagery. And they were just these wonderful science fiction images. These wonderful images of alien planets and scenes of deep space and weird spaceships and aliens and creatures, and these fantasy paperbacks with dragons and wizards and just all sorts of things. It was a wonderful aesthetic. And I fell in love with these images with no knowledge at all of the artists behind them. But it was something that just kind of was filed away in my consciousness over the years. And from time to time, you'd see these images pop up here and there, and you just say to yourself, oh yeah, that was really cool. Only later, much, much later, did I start kind of decoding who these guys were, who these artists were. I said, oh, that was that guy, and oh, this one is that guy. And once you do that, okay, once you do that, you start associating the name of the artist with particular, pieces of art, particular paintings, particular illustrations. And of course you have your favorites and, up and down the pyramid. Well, one of the artists that I appreciated before I knew who he was a man named Frank Frazetta. And if any of you have frequented my personal Facebook page, you can find Frazetta work there fairly regularly. And he really, I would say, has become my favorite artist of these genres. And I say science fiction / fantasy. He's just become my favorite. And although this is highly subjective, I think he may have been the best of all time. And so I wanted to share this with you. And if you're listening along, and if you're watching it on YouTube, on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, if you're watching it on Facebook, of course you see our slideshow is featuring these various works by Frazetta. And in my mind, Frazetta's work almost became the template and the standard by which I started judging all other work of the genres. Whenever I look at science fiction art, whenever I look at fantasy art, I immediately go into this process of like, well, how does this stack up to Frazetta? And I know it's not fair, but I've been so enamored of Frazetta's work for so long, it's just kind of an instinctive thought process. I even, several years ago, and this is when, Frazetta was still alive. He's since passed on, but I was able to purchase several of the prints. I wanted some Frazetta art in my office, frankly. And I purchased, 4 or 5 prints years ago, and I have them hanging in my office right now. And if you're a fan of science fiction art in general, and you're a fan of Frazetta in particular, I would suggest that you find some Frazetta prints online. They should be fairly easy to find, and being prints, they would be at fairly reasonable price points. I believe it's been many years, so I can't be 100% sure, but I think I paid $15 or $20 a piece for these, and I put them in standard poster frames. They look great. And so just something to think about, when you guys are looking to decorate your office or your study, and you're a fan of this type of work, hey, Frazetta prints on the wall are a winner every time. In his career, Frazetta worked on a number of magazines, including Creepy and Eerie, as well as helping design Vampirella. And again, I remember these magazines. Now, I owned very few copies of these particular titles, but I remember seeing them in the stores. I remember my uncle had several copies that I would flip through, and he kind of kept them over the years, and I would flip through them, and there were issues of that magazine that he had I must have flipped through a million times. And now I realize it was because I was so taken by the illustrations. And another area that Frazetta really put his stamp on was the illustrating a lot of Edgar Rice Burroughs titles. Now, of course, I'm also a fan of Edgar Rice Burroughs, so I'm going to be very much inclined to enjoy Frazetta's interpretation of Burroughs' characters, Tarzan, John Carter of Mars, and many others. And so, when you immerse yourself in this kind of cool vintage science fiction and fantasy world, which is just incredible, Frank Frazetta is very firmly established in that universe. And one of the things that I noticed across the spectrum of his work is he captured all of the classic horror film monster icons. Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, Dracula. It's just everything, the Mummy. All of those iconic characters from the golden age of horror films, particularly Universal. To a lesser extent Hammer, but particularly Universal. He captured all of those across the spectrum of his work, and you'll see that if you just give a cursory observation of his catalog, of his body of work. And so there's also kind of like that horror component to Frazetta's work. But just everything, when you think about cool vintage science fiction, when you think about cool vintage horror and fantasy, Frazetta has his fingerprint all over it. Now, that isn't the sum total of Frazetta's work. I mean, because there are many works that he did which captured more realism, and those are exciting too. A lot of action scenes, a lot of action adventure type images, which are also very thrilling, but have a realistic quality, and they're like scenes that you could imagine happening in real life. And of course, anyone who is already a fan of Frazetta is well aware of how exquisitely he was able to capture the female form in a highly appealing, stylized form. So you gentlemen who are Frazetta fans, I'm probably just preaching to the choir. And so that's another aspect that, only adds to how you can enjoy it. I mean, the women that he depicted were almost supernaturally beautiful. And conversely, Frazetta had the ability to make his monsters just insanely hideous. And he just had this way of taking the particular aspects of a theme or subject and exploding them visually exponentially. And so I wanted to share that with you guys on this show because it certainly falls within the confines of cool vintage. It certainly falls into the parameters of science fiction, horror, and fantasy. And I wanted to share that with you. One of the things I want to recommend is a film project that Frazetta collaborated with Ralph Bakshi, the great animator, illustrator, artist, director, Ralph Bakshi. It's an animated film called Fire and Ice. And I believe it was produced in the 80s. And of course now it's available on DVD, Blu-ray. It's probably streaming somewhere. So it is very accessible. You should not have any trouble finding it. But this film captures the essence of Frazetta because you get to see all of the great Frazetta elements. It's a fantasy story. You get to see all of the great Frazetta elements of illustration in a film platform, and it's incredibly lush. It's incredibly elegant. It's very fluid. There's lots of great action. There's terror and fear and great fight scenes and chase scenes, and of course plenty of weird creatures, great magic, and everything's there. It's got everything. So that should absolutely be on your to-do list. It's called Fire and Ice. So definitely pick that up. There will also be some really nice extras on the disc. I won't give that away, but I mean, the extras alone, I feel, justify the price of the disc. And there will be some voice actors in the film. If you are a connoisseur of the cool vintage lifestyle, there are some voice actors in the film that you will recognize and be aware of. And it just kind of, again, enhances the enjoyment level of the film. So definitely look for that. So I'm going to continue enjoying smoking my pipe full of Blender's Gold. I'm going to continue sipping on this wonderful Lord Calvert. And I want to remind you guys, again, go to our YouTube channel, the Blackwater Media YouTube channel. All of our shows are there. I've gotten some wonderful messages from subscribers who, they found the YouTube channel and they basically started binge listening, which I really appreciated because it communicated to me that they enjoyed all the programming. There's some people who only want the kind of paranormal angle of Shadowland. There are some people who may be only interested in the esoteric meanderings of pen and ink. They love the poetry, or they like the great horror narration of the Nightfall radio show, or whatever the case may be. I feel like there's something there for everyone, and I think the really unique thing about Blackwater Media YouTube channel, there are lots of YouTube channels, granted, there's lots of good ones. I think the Blackwater Media YouTube channel is definitely one of the good ones. I think what makes it stand above some of the others is the wonderful variety of programming that we produce. We're not just one thing. And I think this program is just a further example of that. So go up to the Blackwater Media YouTube channel. Definitely listen, binge listen, like, and subscribe. Become a subscriber. That way you get, I think you get automatic updates. Whenever we upload a new show, you should get a notification a kind of non-intrusive notification, but you can keep up with what's going on. And also share it if you have like-minded friends or colleagues or relatives or something you want to expose them to that they may come to like and admire as much as you do. So we're going to call it a night. The legendary Frank Frazetta, the great illustrator, the great artist of science fiction and fantasy, cool vintage particularly. And I appreciate you guys listening. And remember, when you come here, you've got to know up front that it's always cool and it's always vintage. See you next time.